I would like to thank Elzbieta for inviting us today and for the Lund Act to showing these lovely movies. Tonight we have Ingrid from Arkitektens Hus.
Akademiska Hus.
Akademiska Hus, förlåt. And then we have Lærke from Gel Architects and Jesper from the Danish Architecture Association. I think this talk will be about 30 minutes, and then we'll have 30 minutes where we can all discuss and talk and ask questions. I would like to talk short about the films. I think that both films are an expression for how we use the street and the public space, and how life evolves around the street, and that the street is a place where people meet. The first film was more, I saw it more as an activist film where people tried to make the street into a public space by using art, while the second film was more a portrait of how the film is being used. I think if we have to relate this to architecture, the last couple of years, urban intervention within urban planning has been something that has become a method where architects take part in the city before they begin to actually build a project or to draw a project. Whereas in the modernist times it was more like Le Corbusier, you made an utopian plan and then you stood and placed the different functions. So what I would like to ask you as the audience is, how do you see architects being or creating urban spaces today, and how can we create a street where stories like these can evolve? Would you like to start, Lærke?
I start. You mean the process, or what do you?
Yeah, or that before, in the modernist times, you would stand almost as guard and dictate where things should happen in the street, where different kind of zones should be. Whereas today with urban intervention and temporary architecture, it's more to go into the street to get to know the people and to actually talk before you create a new kind of urban architecture.
If I agree, or if I can
so
sort
my
of
question
elaborate
is, how
on
do
that.
you see the architect's role?
Okay, now I see. I think we can have a lot of different roles actually, depending on each project. Of course, we do it in a special way at Gel Architects, and we count people, and we start sort of with the life first. So that's a special method for us. But I think it can happen in a lot of different ways. This whole idea about engaging and talking to people and having workshops is very modern, you can say. It's very something you do around the world in a lot of different ways, and I think there is a cry out from the people to be a part of processes and participate. And somehow that was at least what I especially thought about in the first film. This very deep longing or wish to be a part of something bigger and have a space and a place to be in the city. And of course the first film was very related to a special political situation and a transformation process within a society where that longing or wish maybe becomes even stronger. You can say in the Paris version everybody was more talking about themselves in a way. And in the first one it was very much about the society, and we wanted to make it a better place. We want to take part. We want to make people aware of our dreams and all these things. So there was a different perspective in the two films. But maybe that's not to say that they don't have that perspective also, the people in Paris, but how it was portrayed, that was sort of a difference. Yes?
How do you see it, Jesper?
I think one of the very interesting things in the first film was one of the last bits from Ukraine, where they were talking about the women who were doing the flower carpets.
Yeah.
They talked about how they had been removed from a sit-in they did near the train station, and they talked about the policemen who took them away. And they tried to explain what they apparently were feeling by saying they couldn't figure out what was going on and why, which was apparently what was going on within the heads of the policemen, which is perhaps one of the most dangerous things that can go on if you want to control a crowd or people or society as such. And I think that kind of related to some of the things they were discussing in, I think, the piece from Moldova, where they were talking about how that was Ukraine as well, how a civil society has been evolving on the Maidan Square and in the years ahead, and how the further development of democracy was depending on how this civil society would evolve onwards. And I think in all these 4 or 5 countries visited in the first movie, a very important part here is that this way that they were talking about civil society can only go on in a real public space, not in just like a place where you can go if you want to, but an actual public space, a space that is for the public. Whereas in the second film about Place de la République, this was evidently just basically taken for granted. That you could just go on and you can interact and you could actually just be a citizen in a democratic society. And these things were never really brought into question, which is very much the case when it's just something that you are part of. And I think, to get back to the architect's part, I think I'm also curious about when I get back to the architect's part. But I think it's a thing that one might also take for granted when you are an architect in a country like Denmark or Sweden or wherever, that you might not consider the importance of creating actual public spaces and not just places for people to go, but actual public spaces where democracy can continue to unfold and evolve. And that is sometimes harder than you think. I think you can find a lot of places, and perhaps you also experience that at Gill Architects, and you as a what would your role be in English? An opdragsgiver. Yeah. When you hire architects to do stuff, that you are very often in situations where it's not necessarily a pure public space that you're creating. There's some kind of other stuff going on as well. That might be controlling or regulating or whatever.
So, did you understand Swedish? Not everyone. Okay. 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 Because I feel more comfortable speaking Swedish, but I will speak English. And first of all, I would like to thank for this film, because I think the second one was very, very interesting, and I really enjoyed it, and I hope that everyone did so here. And what happened was, it was a very talented filmer, because he came close to people, and it was the discussions between him and the people on the Republic Place that was the most interesting, because I could have walked over the place and found out nothing. So I think the place is what is in the people, and you have to find the people also, and to give it some time. So that is one thing, and I agree with you. It's very hard to design these places. I think it's almost impossible, and of course we try to do that. And I can also I work all over Sweden, and I work with university buildings and campus areas, and it is different in different places, but we are too few people in the most people places in Sweden, and I think it's the same in Denmark. So what we try to do is to get people to make people come together, and it's also try and error, but also to go out and to talk to people, and of course to space making is a democratic process, absolutely, but there are also functions and buildings that buildings around the space has to form it, and there is also a need for different places, because this republic, Place de la République in Paris, it's very, very crowded, and you also have to have some calm spaces where you can relax, and so I think a public space is sort of rhythm of different spaces and outdoor rooms and also indoor rooms.
So that they both have those quiet spaces and places for transport and activity and...
Yes, and spaces for relax, and spaces for being alone, and spaces for finding people and talk together with people, and spaces where you can just look at people. And I think that was also the situation with the second film. It was like sort of getting into people's secrets. And that was also very, very nice with this film.
I think it's also interesting how the first film, it was the non-established, and that art in a way tried to establish a new kind of tradition of using public space by using themselves as mediums to go into public space and create awareness of the space we're actually using, whereas the second film, the 24 sur place, that was more, it was already established hundreds of years ago. It's a tradition within the culture. And I don't know how you see this, when I know that you have traveled to many different places and been doing urban planning. How have you seen culture as an impact to watch how people use public space?
There are definitely differences, as all over the world people have different traditions or different ways to be in the family and relate that to public space and all these very cultural things. But basically, and that's what we often talk about at Gel Architects, basically we are all the same. Deep down we all want the same. So we like to have a quiet place sometimes where you can sit maybe alone or talk more intimate with the person, and we like sometimes that it's more hectic and there's something going on, but we like all these basic things. And deep down, most of us, what we like most of all, which especially maybe film number 2 was a good example of, we really like this, what are the others doing, and what's you start if you were at that square yourself, you'd start imagining all these things, maybe some stories, and now you actually got the chance to hear some of them because there was an interview. But deep down, most of us find it most interesting to look at everybody else.
So it's almost people attracting people.
Yeah, it's people attracting people. But I think in terms of the art, it was also interesting in the first film how they talked at La Place de la République, the big sculpture. I don't even know exactly what it's symbolizing, but it's symbolizing some sort of the mother of the state or whatever it is, something maybe.
Yeah.
But in the other film, all the sculptures, the existing pieces of art, most of them were representing a political power, the former political power maybe. And when you have the revolution, you often tear down the sculptures because they're representing another political reality. And where was I heading with that? There was this, there was this one man in the first film, he talked about how all these present expressions of art were very it was almost about the power of the society or this thing coming from above. Whereas all the examples in the first film was something coming from below. So this was this other way of thinking about it, I think.
It's kind of this bottom-up approach.
Sort of. Yes.
Yeah, I think perhaps if you consider Paris very much being kind of an example of state-of-the-art urbanism in many ways, which I think that it is. The more artistic approaches in the first film could perhaps be considered more like a basic research into creating public space. Actually, I mean, you're in a situation also specifically in these countries where you do not have a long tradition for democracy and public space, as the examples I was referring to before also witness. And what is going on in Place de la République is basically what is meant to go on in public space. You meet, we meet one another, and we perform and negotiate our different values and behaviors, and agree on, or try to get along with how the other behave themselves, and by that mutually find out how to be a part of society. And that is basically something that we are so used to doing, that we do it every time we meet, and when we meet here, and when we meet in the train, and out and about. And basically what you see is going on in the first movie with the red carpet in the metro is like, how can we do something different here now that we are not necessarily watched or filmed by the government? How can we act out something else and try to negotiate how we could be citizens in a new kind of way? That I find very interesting, and I think also very perhaps inspiring also in terms of how to work with creating new public spaces, and also in a Western European realm.
I agree with you that people are alike everywhere, but I think that space making can also be something about making a community, and that was very strong in the first film. That was in a way the difference between the two films, and I keep on talking about universities because that's what I work with, and that is a mixture of making a community where you can be proud of where you the space or the place where you are, and at the same time it to open it up for others. And I think it's the same with town design maybe, because if we take Lund, there are some benches put out on Stortorget where it's sunny, and there are sunny benches close to the dome, and that is in a way it's Lund, and I think people are proud to be in Lund and to be part of that community. And it's the same in Copenhagen. You have also some new places where it's very much Copenhagen, and I think urban design is also to pick those things and to find them. And to put them in your design. So it's not just about architecture, about design. It's so much about people too.
The soul of the city. The soul of the city.
Yeah, absolutely, Beta. That's.
So it's more about how you can create or emphasize an identity that maybe already exists within a certain kind of culture.
Yeah. Or to pick it, to find it, and that's very difficult.
How do you, when you do, with universities, for example, you already have a very strong community.
Yeah.
How
Not
do you
always.
make that community interact with different communities? Like in the film at the Place de la République, that you had all different kinds of levels of society meeting.
Of course, it's very much about food.
Yeah.
Because food attracts people. We try to. It's difficult to have restaurants in university areas, but we try to give place for restaurants and in good localizations. That's one way. Lot of other things, and of course, students are. They like to do things, and if we take Lund, what people, when students are doing things, when we have the regatta at the technical university, it's in the small sea, and that's very important to attract other people coming in.
Do you then have people just from Lund also coming and taking part in these food events, or?
Not take part in the event, but to be in it and around it.
Yeah.
Of course, universities are international, so there are a lot of people coming from outside.
Now with the financial crisis that happened in 2008, it has been hard for architects to find jobs. So architects often have to find a new role in society that is maybe not only about making buildings, but interacting with society and helping co-create society in a different way. To what extent do you see the role of the architects in the future?
Where we're heading?
Yeah.
That must be something for you.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the role of the architect has changed so much during the last 5 years as it has perhaps during the past 15 years. I think perhaps it depends on what context you look at it, but if you look at the practice of architecture, I think some of the most important changes took place around 2000, perhaps a few years before and a few years after, where there was a huge shift from product to process, not leaving the product behind in any way, but I think that this focus on processes very much already happened just about 15 years ago. Perhaps it's been reinforced some places during the past 5 years, but I don't really see that very much. I think first and foremost the role of the architect in the future is a much more transdisciplinary role, or not for the architect himself or herself necessarily, but taking place in much more transdisciplinary processes, and coming to terms with not heading the design or the construction process anymore, but being one of many partners taking place in the process. Yeah, I think that could be two of the main points, but they are not like architecture in the future kind of points, but just perhaps architecture as it is right now.
So now we're not like a classic architecture company building houses. So our processes in general are probably different than for many other companies. But I think even in the way we work, we are much more. The last years, we are much more engaged directly with you can call it the end users of the spaces we are part. Sometimes we design them ourselves, sometimes we more facilitate the process before they are designed, so there can be different ways. But this whole idea about what you talked about in the beginning, urban interventions, testing stuff, can we do something quick, just see how it works, and if it doesn't work we can change it, and all this whole loosen up the whole process, and that goes for, I think it goes for architecture companies in their interior processes in the offices, but it also goes for the way cities or clients or whoever sort of rules the process on an economic level, the way they think, that they are sort of more open to testing stuff. Because I think the legal framework in many cities are pages, and the processes of getting things approved can be very long. So actually for everybody, it can be kind of a relief that it's all of a sudden possible to test something. Yes, it costs some money, but it doesn't cost as much as doing the final thing. So you have some sort of feeling, is it a good idea? Is the stuff we should sort of adjust? You can sort of test it on the go. I find that super interesting. And then I think there is, in terms of, there's a fine balance. You can say the first film we saw was very much about these artistic expressions. What was interesting, I think, about them in terms of architecture and planning and urban design was that they were all related to the city, the public space, how do we use it, what should it be, who will be there, as all these sort of fundamental questions in what we work with. That was very interesting. But in general, I think that has a huge potential. It has all its rights. It's very important. But I think for many architecture companies, it might be interesting that the process maybe is not as much in this artistic field, but more is in the testing field. So it's a little bit like making the model in 1:1, in scale 1:1, and having the chance to test stuff. That's interesting, I think. Yeah, because it relates back to the way we design, the way we work, the way we think. So there's sort of a loop, a learning loop, even for us as architects.
Yeah, that would probably be one of the biggest differences between the more artistic interventions and you or others working that you would think about why you were doing this and how you could get some kind of feedback back to your own process. Yeah.
But there probably is also, with the artistic interventions, what happens when they die, or if the artists don't practice them anymore. Does the space turn back to what it used to be, or is it still, does it become a new space because people have changed the perception of the space?
It does. I definitely think it does. I mean, some of the examples from Ukraine in the metro, if it was Ukraine, I don't remember. But the red carpet and the guy standing behind
the glass,
behind the window. I mean, you have some kind of memory about spaces and places and bodily experiences you have had there. And I think for the people who experience the red carpet or these guys behind the windows, these places will never be the same again. And I think you can use that as a way of also learning how to go about in public space also in more general terms. I mean, you can learn something from that experience that you can apply in a different situation. And I think that's also a big part of the architect's responsibility, that you design places that can actually empower people to be citizens in some kind of community.
And I think that could be seen in both films, because also in the film about Place de la République, we had an old architect who wanted less people and more grass and more water. So places will always change, or they will die.
But it's also interesting how in both films, at Place de la République and the different spaces that were shown in the Free Spaces film, that the spaces were all more or less platforms that didn't have any, not so much a beauty in themselves, or they didn't dictate people so much where to sit or where to go about. So it seemed more like it was a place where people could create their own kind of space. They could take it into what they wanted it to be and create their own memory of what that place should be. Like you had at Place de la République, you had the dances, and then it changed into a skating field, and then at night there was a small party, and that it kept changing identity depending on the users
Yes.
Yeah.
and time.
Yeah. I think you're often misled by how heavily programmed these public spaces actually are when you look at it. I think it's perhaps difficult to see in a film like this. It's not that long ago I was there, and it's actually it's very well defined, and there are quite obvious zones where different kinds of activities goes on and so on. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I don't think you should mistake it just for a totally unprogrammed space where anything can happen at any time. But apart from that, the mere size of it, of course, makes it more adaptable to different kinds of activities and so on.
How do you engage when you design? How do you take into consideration whether it's a platform or whether it should have different identities within the space?
What do you mean by platform?
What kind of
That nothing
when
is
you
programmed, or?
Yeah, how do you program it?
We like to call it invitations. I think it's very important that a space has invitations, and it can have different kinds of invitations, but ideally it has sort of invitations for all. So for instance, the bench is actually super important because it is an invitation to sit down. And that you could say was lacking in most of the spaces in the first film, because they were sort of, maybe people brought their own chair, and that's also fine. But so I think these invitations are super important. Then Olja and Gil's work sort of shows that there are certain places that people are would like to be, and that has to do with the sun and where there's shade and where all these sort of basic things. So of course, in that sense, there is some programming, like you say in Place de la République. There will be, you wouldn't place the bench in the shade unless you were in a place where people would like it to be shaded, for instance. That also happens, of course. So yes, there is some programming in it. Was that an answer? I don't know.
Yeah, I think so.
I think we also have a challenge in the Nordic countries. We are not really aware about it in urban design, but when we are outside, we all are reminded of our climate, and it's very seldom discussed in projects, at least in the projects I'm working in, and we try to do so more and more, because it's very windy, it can be rainy, but it's nice to be outside, and the sun is important, as you said. So that is something that we have to care for a lot, to invite people to sit down and to be outside and to talk.
Yeah.
But then I think it's important to see an outdoor space as a three-dimensional space, because one thing is the floor, but of course the buildings has a major impact, and that goes for climate and for wind and for sun, but also for what kind of edge do they provide? Is it attractive? Is it completely closed off or whatever? So I think it's very important to see it as a three-dimensional thing. So of course that again goes back to process and how it's important to have this dialogue. There are some people, building architects, that are super good at that. Fantastic, let's have a talk. If we know something more about the outdoor spaces, how do we get these things to meet? So I think this whole process thinking, it goes for within the architecture field and within the different competences we have, that we are more likely to talk with each other maybe than before. I don't know if it was maybe than before, but we are at least very likely to do that in our office. And then it is a process that goes from the users and back to the architects and back again, this sort of feedback dialogue. So I think this process, it's like it has opened more up, maybe more about that. But in general, it's more open in a way. people work more together, like in different constellations,
yeah.
and I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely believe they do. But at the same time, as this focus on processes that I was also referring to before, I think it's very important not to forget the importance of the actual craftsmanship of designing, especially when you talk about this what you call it, like the liminal sphere between the outdoors and the indoors, and how these things come together in especially in public spaces. I mean, that's not just a question about thinking things together, but there's an actual craftsmanship in how to make indoor spaces affect on the outdoor life and so on. How you can make these spaces work together. I think that's an issue, especially perhaps in Scandinavia or in the North European countries, how to do these kinds of things, because we don't have, I mean, hundreds of years of experience in outdoor life for simple reasons, as you just mentioned. I mean, it's like there's a big task of how to design for outdoor living in Scandinavia going on these years, and it's been resolved like decades ago, and the answer is go indoors when the weather is bad. But it's like we have to stay out, and we have to be out in these outdoor cafes and public spaces all year round for some reason. But perhaps it's also a misunderstanding about the term, or in the Scandinavian languages, between public space as a phenomenon and the actual public space, like in between the buildings.
Yeah, it's very rarely discussed, the public indoor space. Often the public indoor space become a mall where you can go and consume, not a street where things normally can take place, and you don't have to actually have a consumerism within the space. I don't think we have this. I don't know if any of you have examples of indoor spaces that are public in the sense of a street, of an outdoor space.
That is what we want to do, and I think we have done those connections in many places. In Lund, for people who know Lund, we have Lux, which is very much connected, so you can pass through the building, go in from one side and out on the other side. And of course, it's very nice to have these student environments and academic environments, because it's not commercial, and it's very easy to open it to outdoor working spaces.
Do people from the outdoor also go in and use it as their space?
Yeah, absolutely. Out and in, there are no borders. It's just the climate, the weather. And it's wonderful to see. It's not easy to find out how to do it, but it's wonderful to see when it's done and when it functions. But that's what we strive for, very much.
It's also a way to, I think one of the other themes in the film was freedom of speech, and how the public space or the street actually helps us cultivate democracy and helps us meet different levels of society all in the same space with the same kind of we have the same kind of possibilities. And I think in the Scandinavian countries, in the winter times, because we are so seasons based as we are, these things don't occur, so it sounds lovely that you have such a space in the academic.
What kind of space?
That you have an indoor space that functions as the outdoor space does.
Yes, there are some of those too. I don't think it's not a very big difference between your own home, if you are in a villa, the trend to combine outdoor and indoors, and I think it's the same with some public places, and I think we should go for that much more. Because people and also for the green environment to connect not exactly gardening but parks and green areas outside with pleasant places inside.
I think it depends on what you consider an indoor space. Perhaps, I mean, you could easily cover the main street in any city and say that you had an indoor public space. And that happens, not necessarily Main Street, but spaces around town. Or but in most situations when that happens, one of the ways to make it happen is to have some private party enter into the project to do it, which means that in effect you have not necessarily a privately owned, but at least in some degree a privately controlled public space, which is perhaps more often the case than the other way around, that you have an indoor public space, you have some kind of outdoor, in effect, private space. It looks like a public space, and it's most of the time, in most of situations, like people like us, it would function like a public space, but it would in effect be a privately owned or at least privately controlled space where we would basically not necessarily be citizens but actually consumers when we went there. Not because you necessarily had to consume, but you wouldn't have any other reason to go there than to consume. And that could be a place in the middle of any major European city. Basically, you would find places like this in Stockholm, at least. I know you would. I know you would in Copenhagen. And you would in Paris and Berlin, New York, wherever you would go to, you would find these kinds of places. And you could say that in most situations it doesn't matter. It would mean that you would have like a private people walking around as guards and keeping clean and stuff like that. And it wouldn't really matter. I mean, they would just be there to tidy up the place. But in effect, it means that your way of being in the city as a citizen is limited also to some kind of rules set up by a private company, and you wouldn't necessarily be aware of that. And that, I think, is something we should be not afraid of, but very much aware of. What happens when we cross this border? It's not necessarily bad, and in many situations it's necessary, but we have to be very, very aware about what happens with public space when we do these kinds of things.
I think it's very much about how the city is built up, because in the US it's difficult to say public space because it's a legal term. This is publicly owned space, so that's why they call it open space. But I think it's because a lot of the open spaces in many US cities are actually on private land.
Yeah.
So they have this challenge you talk about, that there is potentially a guard in the corner that sort of controls how you behave. And then they also have, like, purely in our Scandinavian context, public spaces where there's not a guard or anything. But it has some sort of limitations to how people can be in a space and who can be there, how many can be there of different kinds. But in our research in Copenhagen, it's actually interesting. The most diverse spaces are Amager Strand. It's a new strand, yeah. And then there is Islands Brygge Havnepark, where there is a big green park, and there's a harbor bath. And those are the two locations, at least in Copenhagen, where you see the greatest diversity in age and gender and cultural background. So that's very interesting. That's sort of the spaces where you meet. Maybe in some of the parks, we haven't done that much research in parks, compared with, for instance, some of the inner city spaces that are much less diverse, that are fewer kids, and so forth and so forth. So that's interesting how things work.
Okay, hi, I'm David Sim. I'm a colleague of Lerke at Gale, and also I live in Lund. I guess I wanted to really react on this go inside thing, because I kind of maybe disagree a bit, or I'd like to sharpen the point. I thought it was interesting that Jesper talked about what we've been doing for decades, go inside, decades. We've been living in the north of Europe, in Scandinavia for thousands of years. So we know how to live outside. If you know Lund, you can sit on the edge of Domkyrkan in a January day if there's a bit of sun. There are lots of bits of the medieval city which are totally inhabitable even in winter. And if you look at any old photographs, old paintings, you'll see that the city was full of life even when it was cold. Because we knew how to do it. We knew how to make microclimatically comfortable places, even in bad weather. And also, we knew how to dress for the weather. And now, if you look at the culture of public spaces with private invasion of cafes, it's really interesting that in the last 20, 30 years that the phenomenon has existed, that what was considered to be a thing only for the summers got longer. And now you see these cafe terraces starting in March and going on till about Christmas. So I think we don't need to go inside. Historically, we knew how to do it. We can still do it. And I guess also maybe just this question, I don't know, is really these, I don't believe that Akademiska Hus offers any real public spaces. I think if I wanted to hand out leaflets for amnesty, I wouldn't be allowed to do that. I'm sure that our guests from Romania would not be allowed to sit and beg in those inside public spaces. So I think we have to be aware that those more open private spaces are not a substitute for the public realm. And I don't think we need to pretend that they are. I don't think they need to be. I think we just have to be really, really clear about that. You might want to comment.
Yes, I can do that. No, I don't think it's a question for Akademiska Hus. It's for the university, the user, and I'm not absolutely sure you are right. But this is also about this community, and that's what I'm thinking of very often when we discuss campus, because it can't be too open, because when it's too open, it's not the community, and it's sort of balance between the two. And you don't have to agree with me, but I'm often thinking of that sort of balance, and if it is correct. But I think there is something in it that the academic should feel itself academic too. And academic is to be open for guests. So that's also in the tradition.
Yeah, the word neighborhood is used a lot. It's become a really trendy word, I guess, when it's come from the States. We don't use neighborhood very much in Europe or in British English. And what's interesting, the word neighborhood is not a place. I mean, if you look at the origin of the word, it's like Dutch, German, it's a state of mind, it's a behavior, it's an attitude, it's not a place. And I think maybe it's more about the attitude of being open, and it's not, community is not exclusive. And I think why maybe all of this is relevant, I mean, in the break I was just looking at my phone and seeing this huge influx of immigrants or refugees we're going to see in the next coming weeks here in the north of Europe. And I think that's going to be our biggest challenge for public space, and maybe the public space is the one place we can meet. So I don't know, maybe that's something you might want to comment to end with. This phenomenal change we're seeing, and especially, and it's on an axis, Germany, Sweden, I mean, is coming here. I don't think they're going to get to stay in Denmark. But
don't worry.
And that's, I mean, how can the public space help accommodate, help invite those people? That was a good question to the panel.
Very good question. I really like these scenes when they come to Germany and everybody. It's a little bit, I thought about when in that movie with the red carpet, it's almost that greeting they get, but that's in a somewhat private space because it's in the airport or in the train station. I don't remember. It's not the airport, it's the train station. I really like those scenes. I don't have a question, an answer right now, David. I will think a little. And
I loved the idea they made in the film, so I thought maybe we could start the festival the same way in the train station.
Yeah.
So I wrote a mail for the non-chief. No, it's not absolutely not possible because it can be dangerous for people. Somebody maybe is handicapped. But you saw the man in this film. So it is a question of attitude here in Sweden. Rules are very strong here for us.
Yeah.
Yes, Jesper?
Yeah, I think to relate to what David said in the end, not about going inside, outside, but about the refugees and public space. I think it's an excellent example of how you can use public space to express your opinion and your emotions, and you can use it to try to change what you would believe would be the general opinion, or what the political majority at any given time would be doing. I mean, you didn't necessarily. This has nothing to do with my personal political opinion, but you didn't necessarily elect the sitting government because of their views on this case, but because of their views of a host of different cases in general. And now you have this situation, and that is again where I think this thing about the civil society comes into place, because that's more than just being one individual human being or citizen. It's about organizing yourself to try to and actually act, just as we saw in the first film, to make change happen.
Are there an easy answer to this question? You said there was a crisis. Yes, there was a crisis in Lund a couple of years ago. They built a new town outside the real town, and that's a very big crisis. You talked about it. And it's very nice to be there shopping and sitting and eating and so on. And all some people had fled out to this town, new town. How the stores here in Lund gets more and more empty. But there's still people in town. But I'm a little bit scared. Also the political here in town. They say when we are going to have some cultural events, there's a lot of them in Malmö and big towns around. So that's it is for our town, of course. Maybe it's not a global problem. I don't know. Sometimes there are towns which are very proud and are setting up theaters and art halls and so on. But is it what shall we do? Is it enough with skateboard areas and benches in the city, or should we have more? Is it possible that we can buy our bread or milk or have culture also in the city, or in the way we built the town, not a new town and empty space that actually did work. I'm scared for that developing. Is there easy answer on this very big problem?
So your question is, how do we get life back into the cities and use the public space that already exists?
Not necessarily, but I'm sentimental. I like Lund,
Yeah.
the old towns. But you can move, actually. But how should we build a new town? What is it in it? It is eating hamburgers and shopping and what are we doing? This is what the new shopping areas is all about. So it scares me.
Where you can control where people go and buy their groceries on any design level, I think, neither on a national planning level or street design level, but what you can do is to be very active in your urban planning scheme, and you need to have a planning act that can support you in doing so, and that is a very big difference. There's a very big difference between Sweden and Denmark in that sense, because we still have a planning act that prevents huge out-of-town hypermarkets, which you don't have in Sweden, and that is one thing that you can do. You can just legally ban these huge markets outside of town. Case closed. That's the easy answer.
And then you can introduce look-alone.
Yeah.
No, it is true. We have a legal loft for that.
Yeah, but not really anymore.
No,
But
it's
used
under
to.
pressure.
Yeah.
I know that 20 years ago there were Paris. All the Paris were depending on the North African people that kept all the small stores, and they were working from 7 in the morning to 11 in the night, and there's no Parisian who is going to do that. So it was the northern of Africa that keeps Paris alive.
It's just like the Swedes in Copenhagen.
Yeah, probably. But that must be the discotheques.
You don't know there isn't a cafe or a shop
Or 7-Eleven or...
in Copenhagen that doesn't have Swedish staff.
No.
So the Swedes are the Negroes of Denmark.
Yeah.
I actually have a comment to your the thing you said about inside and outside public space. That I think that before, when you talked about all of these immigrants coming now to Denmark, to Sweden, mostly just going through Denmark, that before we used the church as a way to welcome them inside in a public indoor space. Of course, that has a religious meaning towards it. I had a very beautiful experience. I was in north of Sweden, very up north, and in Sweden you have the Sommerpratet at P1. And there was this church, a very modern church in a very small society, I think maybe 1,000 inhabitants, that arranged that one of the people who was actually from that society and then went away and became a famous Swede, came back, and together with a local musician they created a little performance where he would read up his Sommerpratet. And it was very interesting to see how the church, for me, it's something that is very empty on Sundays and a place where people don't go. That suddenly this space, all the locals were there, the whole town was there, people had to stand up, and the church had made small drawing boards for kids, so the kids could also be there and to run around, and suddenly it became like being in a park where there was a small performance happening. But it was in a church, but you didn't feel the presence of the religious. And I think this is something that with our modern development, we don't have these kind of spaces today. They have turned into malls that has, as you talked about, Jesper, with the private, or you talked about the guards and how it is in the States, that there are certain rules. Of course, there are certain rules in a church also, but you don't have næstekærligheden, the love for your next, as the church does. And I think maybe that's a way to rethink how you can have a public space. It doesn't have to be a church, but use the same kind of qualities. Just a comment.
I think that's the most beautiful answer we could get to the whole evening.